Hello YouTube. Just wanted to preface this video by first of all saying sorry. I am not a YouTuber. I'm not good on camera. I ramble on too much. But hopefully you'll find what I put together in this video helpful. I made this a few years ago when I was working on an issue with a 91 Subaru Legacy that I had with a 4 EAT transmission. I was having issues at low speeds, like going around corners, parking lots, etc., with kind of bucking and binding up, issues with the all-wheel drive system essentially. And so this video hopefully will help somebody maybe who's having the same issue, or just understand some of the principles of diagnostic that I go through here. I don't wrench for a living anymore, but I did for a lot of years, and formerly was ASE Master Certified. I'm not claiming that that means much or that I'm great in any way, but I enjoy diagnostic stuff, and this was kind of a fun video for me and a fun process to go through to keep my skills a little sharp, since I don't do it for work anymore. So hopefully this is helpful, and yeah, thanks for watching. So this is the tail housing of the transmission. You can kind of see it here. And this clutch pack that is splined to the output shaft is what controls your rear drive. Basically, this little valve body here and this solenoid direct fluid pressure to this clutch pack, and at low speeds it's supposed to modulate pressure to allow this clutch to slip a little bit, so that as you're, if you've ever driven around in a dry parking lot in a four-wheel drive truck with it locked in four-wheel drive, that hopping and stuff, this is supposed to slip that clutch so it can allow some differential speed between the front and the rear wheel, so you don't get that hopping and that binding. So what we're going to do is this clutch pack actually seems pretty good. I mean, everything seems to turn inside here. Sometimes what'll happen is, if they're driven with the wrong size tire on the back, or even just the spare tire for extended periods of time, this clutch will slip so much that it heats up and actually welds itself together. And I don't see any signs of that here. I don't see any clutch material anywhere, and all the clutch plates and steels seem to spin freely. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull this little valve body off and inspect it. Subaru cannot get this for this car anymore, but I have found a few places online. So we're going to pull it off. We're going to test the solenoid. We're going to look at the valves in the valve body and see if we just have a sticky valve or a bad solenoid, and hopefully that'll fix our problem. So I actually knocked this output shaft and clutch pack out so you could kind of see it here. And I have to get to that bolt right there so that I can release that tube, that feed tube. You can see right here there are two sealing rings that when you put that back in, you're going to want to take care not to ruin those. That hole is what feeds fluid from here, well, from back, I guess it's back in here in the tail housing. That's what feeds fluid pressure into that clutch pack. And so both of those rings, they're Teflon type ring. They have to seal, so make sure you don't damage those. Okay, just to show you kind of how this comes apart. Once you have the two brackets off of this tube, it just pops out. So that just comes out of there. And then the two bolts off of the solenoid. Again, it's got an O-ring that I will probably replace after I check it out a little bit. And then your bolts, the remaining bolts for the valve body. Okay, so now that we've got those bolts off, you got to pry this a little bit. It's stuck down with a gasket, so just kind of pry it a little bit. Just be careful not to damage it. It comes off, and you can see there's two spool valves in there, which we're going to remove with that clip. And there should be another clip, I think. Oh, there's a roll pin, looks like. We'll check that out and see what we can do to make sure those valves are free, pull them out, clean them up. And then obviously, so here's your gasket, and then there's an orifice plate, just like a separator plate on a valve body of an automatic transmission, the main valve body. So there's another gasket there. And we're going to clean this all up and see what we can find in here. If there's anything, looks like we do have like a little magnet or something in there. Sometimes they'll, anyway, we'll clean that up, see what we find. So the first test we're going to do on this solenoid is just a ohm test, just to see if the circuit is even complete. If it was open, that would indicate that it was obviously bad. So we've just got our multimeter leads hooked up here. We're showing about 13.1 ohms. So I don't know what the spec is for those windings. I don't know if there's a way that it's shorted. But it does tell me that the circuit's complete. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to power test it and see if we can make it click. So the next test we're going to do is checking the solenoid for operation. So part of that is whether or not the solenoid operates, and if it is moving, opening and closing, is it sealing off like it should? Because what this solenoid does, it goes into this bore here, and obviously the bore is fed right by this passage here. And as this solenoid opens, as power is applied to it, it opens the pintle in here and it bleeds pressure off from that circuit that applies the clutch. So as it does that rapidly, that's what gets you your, variation in apply pressure. So we've got this hooked up to the battery here, just some jumper leads, and we'll just touch this and see if it clicks. So you can hear it click. Now I'll show you a quick, easy way to test, not 100% foolproof, but usually works pretty good, to see if it seals. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to put the solenoid, and I'm just going to blow air into the port here as I connect the ground to the ground on the solenoid. We've still got power jumpered from the battery. So you might be able to hear air blowing as I do this. So no air when it's closed. Doesn't seem to be leaking. You can hear as I connect and disconnect that it is flowing air through there. So that tells me that the solenoid is probably good. So I've got another problem somewhere. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to test this solenoid on the vehicle to see if it's operating. Hopefully you guys can see this okay here. This is obviously the back of the transmission where we've removed the extension housing that's got the transfer clutch assembly in it. We've got the solenoid hooked back up here. It's just got a single wire plug-in, and then I've got a ground wire connecting the ground lug just to the case of the transmission. So what we're going to do is, up in the engine compartment on the passenger side by the firewall is the little spot for a fuse that says FWD. It's the front wheel drive fuse. And what that does is that's supposed to disable the transfer clutch, so make it not applied completely, so that you can drive with a smaller size spare on the back. So with that fuse in, we should have power to the solenoid, and therefore it should open and allow fluid to bleed off. So we're gonna check and see if that works, and if it does, then we've got another problem we need to figure out. But my diagnostic so far has led me to possibly it's something in the control side of that solenoid, because the solenoid itself seems fine and the clutch seems fine. So we'll see. Okay, we've got our solenoid here. The power is on the key. The FWD light on the dash is illuminated, telling us that that's activated. So as I connect this ground to ground, we should hear this click if it's working. And it's not wanting to, it was just clicking just a second ago. So maybe we do have a problem here. Let's try this one more way. Okay, so I've gone through a few steps here. I'm going to walk back through them. So the last thing, we were testing the solenoid on the car to see if it would actuate when we basically jumped power to it, and it worked at first before I started filming, and then it quit. So I went back and I chased the wiring down that comes from the transmission control unit. So up under the dash here, this gold bronze colored box, that's the transmission control unit. So you can see I've got the connectors unplugged here, and I've got a probe in the wire that sends power from the TCU to the solenoid to basically allow it to vent pressure to unapply that clutch. And so I can jump power directly from the battery to this pin. So we're completing the circuit, we're going down to the transmission. And then I had my test light down here hooked up to the wire that comes out of the transmission. I don't know if you can really see it anyways. And we get power. So every time I touch power there, it lights the test light. So now what I'm doing is I'm going back and I'm going to check it with the solenoid, basically as it would be wired up in the vehicle. I'm grounded at the same ground point, and I've got the other end of this red lead runs up to the transmission case, which is where it receives its ground, through the transmission case. And then I've got this lead right here, and it runs up and it connects to the connector at the transmission that normally would plug in to that connector. And I've also got the test light in line just for a visual. So what should happen if everything works is the solenoid should click, and we should, light the test light every time I touch power to here. So we're going to go ahead and try that. Okay, we're all hooked up here. I've got a hot lead here off the battery. We're going to connect it to our pin here. We're going to see what happens. I've just kind of got the test light touching the probe right there. So we're going to listen for a click and look for a light. So here we go. Okay, looks like it does it every time. I could sit here and do it 100 times and see if it ever failed, but that's a good enough test for me. So that leads me down the road of there being nothing mechanically or electrically wrong with the solenoid, the valve body, or the clutch pack itself. Unless somehow that clutch pack is bleeding off pressure, which I doubt it is, and I can air check that with compressed air. You just put it up to the port that I showed earlier in the video, which I don't feel like that's the issue, obviously, because the clutch pack is staying applied. So if we were not getting rear wheel drive engagement, then I would maybe think that was part of the problem, but we are. So what I did, I went and snagged an extra transmission control unit from the U-pull yard. So we're going to put this thing back together, and I'm going to plug this TCU in place of the one that's on the car and see if that TCU will disengage the rear wheels as we go around corners, so we don't get that binding. So I want to show you guys what has led me to believe that the transmission control unit is the problem. So I've got the factory TCU hooked back up, all the wires are connected, and we've still got the front wheel drive fuse installed, which grounds a wire that goes to the TCU and tells the TCU to send power to the solenoid to bleed off all the pressure so that there's no rear engagement. So I've got that all hooked up, and if I turn the key on, watch what the test light does. Turn the key off, on again, shuts off. It goes on momentarily, and then for whatever reason, it shuts off. Now I'll show you what it does with the replacement TCU. Okay, so we've got the replacement plugged in, and by the year, this is not out of the same year car. This is out of a 92. This car is a 91. But anything from 90 to 94 should work on these cars. But this is more so just to show you the diagnostic process. So here we go, same test. Does not shut off. Do it again. We're staying on. So for whatever reason, the old TCU was basically not sending power the whole time to that solenoid. So we're going to put this thing back together now and try it with this replacement TCU and see if that binding is gone. Before we start slapping this thing back together, I just wanted to touch on this for those of you who aren't familiar with clutch packs like this. You can see these teeth around here. Those index with another set of splines that connects the output shaft to the rest of the transmission. So when you put this back together, just want to make sure that those are all lined up properly so that it slides in. Thanks for watching. Hopefully you found that somewhat informative or useful. I apologize I didn't show every step of putting the tail housing back on or removing it. There's probably plenty of other videos that you could find. It's fairly self-explanatory. I didn't show putting the valve body back into the tail housing assembly, but it makes sense, you know, put it back together with new gaskets, or if you saved the old paper gaskets without tearing them, you can reuse those. But yeah, not great editing, I apologize, and hopefully I made somewhat sense to some of you.